Hello, everybody. Welcome to this bonus episode of Addressing Gettysburg. Now, this episode was originally recorded with the intent of it being premium content. But there's two reasons why I'm releasing it now as a free episode and as a bonus. One is I'm not crazy about my interviewing skills on this one. I was kind of rusty, and I think it was one of the first interviews that we had done. And so I wouldn't pay for my conducting of the interview, so I don't think you should pay for it either. But also because of the subject matter. The subject matter is about Scott Hartwig's book, A Killer Angel's Companion. And the reason I think that's important to get out here for free is because a lot of people are introduced to the Battle of Gettysburg either through the book, The Killer Angels, or through the movie Gettysburg, which was based on the Killer Angels. Not many people maybe know about or seek out a book like A Killer Angel's Companion because, maybe they're happy enough to believe that everything that they read in the Killer Angels is history. And perhaps they don't even realize that it's a novel. Whatever the reason may be, it's a great primer to get you interested in the Battle of Gettysburg. It is based in history, but it is not history. So Scott has written a pretty easy book to read, and it kind of just goes through the novel, The Killer Angels, and kind of gives you a fact versus fiction type of a look at things. So we had Scott come by to talk about his book and what the difference is between the movie version, the novel version, and reality. And I cut this down. It was a long conversation that we had, and it was a good conversation and a lot of fun to have. Scott's a great guy to talk with, but to listen to as he talks. So I cut it down as best I could for you guys to, not have to listen to like 4 hours of conversation or whatever it ended up being. I forgot what it was, but this is as close to succinct as I could get it to be. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn something from it. And I hope this holds you over until episode 2 is released, which hopefully is going to be sooner rather than later, but it is quite an undertaking. So I'm only one man. Anyway, enjoy. I'm Matt Callery.
And I'm Peter Bonfanti.
And we are Addressing Gettysburg. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this bonus episode of Addressing Gettysburg. I'm Matt Callery. With me in New Jersey is Peter Bonfanti. And Pete, we have a celebrity in our midst tonight.
Really?
Yes. Well, in my midst. You're up in New Jersey.
Yeah, there's nobody in my midst.
No, it's not Martin Sheen.
It's not Martin Sheen?
No.
God's will.
No, he is a celebrity in certainly the National Park Service world, the history world. You've seen him on the History Channel. He's won the National Park Service Regional Freeman Tilden Award for Excellence in Interpretation back in 1993. You got an idea who this is yet, Pete? There's more. There's more. Yeah. He's recently retired back in 2014 from the National Park Service. He's authored numerous articles, essays, and books on the Civil War. And he's appeared on the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, and perhaps most impressively, PCN, Pennsylvania Cable Network. But his most recent book is Antietam Creek, the Maryland Campaign, To Antietam Creek, the Maryland Campaign from September 3rd to September 16th. Pete, guess how long that book is?
283 pages.
No, 800 pages.
Holy moly.
And guess what?
Just on the bottle, about the Battle of Antietam?
No, he stops right before the battle.
The whole Maryland campaign.
Yes, and his next book is going to cover the battle.
It's a big cliffhanger ending to the book.
Right. Do they fight it out at Antietam Creek? We shall find out. But ladies and gentlemen, his name is Scott Hartwig. Thanks for coming on, Scott. It's great to have you.
It's good to be here.
It actually really is quite a thrill to have you on here.
Well,
and it was great.
Thanks for asking me.
Oh, absolutely. We were having wings before, and we were talking, and and having some good conversation that we're not going to repeat here because it was private, but it was good conversation. So, Scott, you wrote a book that is called A Killer Angel's Companion. And it is a companion to the Killer Angels, obviously, from the title. But the idea of it is a lot of people... have come down here to Gettysburg thinking that what they read in the Killer Angels is all history, real history, but they don't realize it's a novel, or they can't tell the difference between what's fictionalized and what's real. So you're setting the record straight with this book, or you did set the record straight with this book. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the where this book grew out of was a series of lectures that I gave at Harrisburg Area Community College about Killer Angels as history.
Okay.
And a local publisher, Dean Thomas, heard about that, and he said, we ought to turn that into a book. So it was his idea, actually, to do a book on it. I didn't intend to do a book on it. So my idea in the book was that I knew that Killer Angels got a lot of people into the Civil War and into history and interested in history. So I didn't want to denigrate the book in any way. But I did want people to realize what was the real history of the Battle of Gettysburg, and where did Shara deviate from that, and maybe a little bit of why.
Michael Shara, the author.
Yeah. Right. So that's really where it came from.
And how long did it take you to write it?
I don't remember, actually.
No. I would imagine probably quickly, right?
Yeah, fairly quickly. I mean, some of it was, I knew a lot of these different things, so I knew where the source material was to go to look up Buford or Longstreet or Lee. But it took a little bit of time because you have to do some research when you're writing something like this. You want to present to the reader, okay, well, here's what Shara said about Buford.
Yeah.
All right. Here's what people actually wrote about Buford who knew him, who served with him. This is the sort of person that he was. So he's significantly different than what you think he is if you just read the novel.
So you talk about Buford in the book. See, now I just finished the book, but I've seen the movie Gettysburg, which is based on the book, probably 500,000 times. And the first person we see in the movie Gettysburg is Harrison the spy. Okay.
Right.
So why don't we get him out of the way? Let's talk about him and how I know that he did actually inform the Confederates, but after that whole initial information, telling where the Union Army is and everything like that, was he that integral in the story of the Battle of Gettysburg? What happened to him after he spills the beans?
Well, he's still, there's a possibility that he came into Gettysburg because when General Pettigrew, he had an infantry brigade that was ordered to march to Gettysburg on June the 30th to search the town for supplies.
Right.
When Pettigrew marched to Gettysburg, there were two people who came out of Gettysburg who warned him on the march that Union cavalry was approaching the town. One was a local citizen who was a Southern sympathizer, but the other, they state, was a spy in the employ of General Longstreet. Now, we don't know that was Harrison.
Could have been somebody else.
But the odds are pretty good that it was Harrison.
Okay.
The one thing about Harrison is that he, in the novel and the movie, you get the impression that Lee has no other sources of information.
Right.
This is it.
Right.
Once Jeb Stuart he's cut off from Jeb Stuart, he has no other sources of information.
Right.
Well, of course, that's not true. Someone like Lee never operated that way.
Okay.
Lee had multiple sources of information, and we don't know. It's possible Lee already knew what Harrison brought to him. It is possible that Lee didn't know it, but that he then sought confirmation from other sources of information. So he's not the only guy who's out there. And as far as what he does afterwards, I forget. I think he continues, doing some spying for the Confederate Army. It was a dangerous business.
Sure. You get hanged.
Well, they did after the battle was over, when the Union Army is pursuing the Confederates.
Right.
Buford's cavalry captures a Confederate spy. Now, I don't know who he was, but they hung him.
At Sachs Bridge? Or
no,
who are those guys?
No, they didn't hang him there. It was down in Maryland.
Oh, Maryland.
It was
okay.
down in Maryland, yeah.
So was Harrison actually an actor?
Yes, apparently he was.
Okay.
Yeah, apparently he was an actor.
Now, Harrison, he's talking to Longstreet. So let's go to Longstreet now. Longstreet's Lee's second in command. Now there's the whole thing. We have to remember the book The Killer Angels was written in the 1970s. So politically and culturally, like, what was going on in the United States then? What was the attitude towards war and the United States Army, and what was all that stuff that went into or informed his writing of that book? Well,
I mean, Michael Shera is a Vietnam veteran, and it's his book comes out right after the Vietnam War, and if my brother was any indication, he was in the Navy, but he was in Vietnam. When he came home from the Navy, he took all of his uniforms, he piled them in a pile in the garage, and he left them there and never wanted to see them again. The attitude was, we're out of Vietnam, the military, people were down on the military. The My massacre and those sorts of things had soured a lot of people in the military, and a lot of people in the military were very soured on the military when they came home. So there was just a bad feeling all around. So we weren't looking for building up heroes and elevating the military. We were kind of cynical, I would say.
Yes. Okay.
It was a cynical age.
But this was a kind of a counter to that cynicism, right?
In some ways, but Longstreet's also like the great cynic in the book. He's the sardonic, far-seeing individual that nobody really wants to listen to. He has these ideas. He knows how to win the battle. If only old Granny Lee would listen to him and do what he wanted him to do, everything might have turned out differently. Yeah. There's a great line in the book where I think it's in the very beginning where they're talking about the different characters, and that Longstreet he invents the trench. And I think maybe that came from the fact that Longstreet, from the Battle of Fredericksburg, saw the value of fighting behind stone walls and breastworks in a defensive stance. And so I guess from that it morphed into he invented a trench. And I'm like, well, the Roman army entrenched every night.
Right.
All right, they knew about trenches. Everybody who was West Point trained knew about trenches.
Yeah, didn't they do that around Yorktown?
Yeah, he didn't invent it. He didn't invent any trenches. In fact, Longstreet was a very good tactician, but he wasn't innovative in any way in any tactics at all.
He was just solid.
He was a good tactician.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't a very good strategist, but he thought he was.
Okay.
That was one of his problems.
Okay.
He thought he was an excellent strategist.
Okay. All right. So now he's very the character of Longstreet speaks in hindsight, even though the things he's speaking about have yet to happen. I mean, how much of that is actually just Shara being dramatic and putting those words in his mouth? Do we know that he predicted that no 15,000 men could ever take that position?
We do know that Longstreet was adamantly opposed to the attack. We know that from other sources. Longstreet's the one who tells us that he made this statement, no 15,000 men ever arrayed for battles. You have to accept him that he said this to Lee.
But that was written years later, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And
during, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that was written years later during a big firestorm in which he was the scapegoat for the lost cause.
Right. Well, he did two things. He did become a Republican, and he accepted a job with the Grant administration. And the second thing he did is he criticized Lee.
Yeah.
Now, some of Longstreet's criticism of Lee was actually warranted and justified, and some of Longstreet's criticism of Lee was ridiculous. One of the things that everyone wants to do is they always want to elevate themselves to look good.
Right.
Of course, that was one of the things that Longstreet was trying to do, was to elevate himself to look good. In the memory of Gettysburg,
right?
Because everybody's, after the war is over, these players upon this great drama, they all know this is a significant moment in American history. They want to shape how they're remembered, and it's more common that someone is going to maybe err on the side of shaping themselves to look good than someone is going to say, look, I want to tell you what I saw. This is what really happened. Most people aren't going to do that. Most people are going to shape it a little bit to their advantage.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so Lee, and Longstreet. Throughout the movie or the book, Longstreet is, especially when it comes to Pickett's Charge, but he's always wanting to go around the right. He's always wanting to go around the Union right and get in between them. Now, they make that a big deal. It's very dramatic that way because, he's the guy that Lee is relying on, and he's not even 100% on board throughout the whole story. Now, how accurate is that?
Or there's that great scene in the movie where John Bell Hood says, should have gone around to the right, Pete. Yeah. The one thing that Lee never gets credit for and the Civil War is funny in that people have their favorites, and they'll dismiss everything that's negative about their favorite.
Yes.
And elevate everything that is favorable about their favorite. And, Lee and Longstreet both have their favorites. Lee probably has more than Longstreet does, but they both have their favorites. And the truth lies in between on this one here, is that there is some element of truth in what Longstreet has to say, but what Lee never gets any credit for is on the second day of the battle, Lee's battle plan is essentially a scaled-down version of what Longstreet recommended. But Longstreet never gives him any credit for that. Well, here's the thing. Longstreet is suggesting to Lee a half-baked plan. I mean, it's not thought through. It's like, let's take the army and maneuver around and get between the enemy and Washington, D.C. So if you're Lee, you don't just look at a map and go, oh, let's move these pieces from here to over here. You look at, I have 3,000 wagons. I have X number of thousand wounded from the first day's fighting. What is the road network? How do I move this army in enemy territory? I don't have my cavalry to screen and scout for this movement. So the reality is that Lee almost certainly seriously looked at what Longstreet was suggesting and realized it was an impractical suggestion. But he did agree with Longstreet that a flanking movement was the best move. And he orders a flanking movement, which Longstreet gives him no credit for. And it's Lee gives Longstreet, here's what you really want. You want the flanking movement. It's not the big one that you want. It's a tactical one. And here's my objective. You carry it out.
Now, this flanking maneuver you're talking about, or movement you're talking about, is that you're talking about at the end of the first day? There's that marker out near the angle, a little south of the angle, that, and I forget who was holding that position, but it says extreme left of the Union line, July 1st, or something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, yeah, but the way Lee found out where the left flank of the Union Army was, he ordered a reconnaissance really early in the morning of July the 2nd. And that reconnaissance, which we now know was flawed, but that reconnaissance told Lee that the left flank of the Union Army was, as the Army in that era would say, in the air. What it means in the air, it means there's no natural feature protecting the flank of the Union Army. And it was along the Emmitsburg Road. So, and they didn't occupy the Peach Orchard, and they didn't occupy Little Round Top, and they didn't occupy Big Round Top. That whole area wasn't occupied yet by the Union Army.
They're kind of in a low area,
right? So
comparatively.
So it looked to Lee like Longstreet could make a concealed march and bring his corps up on the flank of the Union Army and roll the flank up.
Right.
That was the plan.
Right.
We'll roll the flank up. And Longstreet didn't like the plan because he didn't want to fight here at Gettysburg. And in some sense, you can go, I can sympathize with Longstreet that the Union Army holds the advantage of position, but there is an advantage to having the initiative. And you've got it after the first day's fighting. This is not the battlefield you chose, but you have the initiative. You pick the time and the place. So if you take, people and you put them in the shoes of General Meade, the Union commander, and say, okay, it's the morning of July 2nd. Where's Lee going to attack you and why, and where are you going to put the most of your men? Well, once they start to get in Meade's shoes, they realize he's at a disadvantage. Lee's got the advantage in determining the time and the place of where I'm going to strike you.
Right.
And he can conceal that movement, and Meade doesn't know where it's going to be. So Meade has to kind of be prepared to go in any direction. So he's not going to be strong anywhere. That's the advantage that Lee has, and I think Lee understands that. Whereas Longstreet says, well, let's do this vague maneuver. Why not my cavalry? Where are we going to maneuver to? Why are we going to maneuver to this place? Why do you think, if we maneuver, that we're going to end up in another position where we're going to be able to fight on the defensive? And by the way, Lee doesn't even like to fight on the defensive for the very reason I just explained.
Yeah.
You're sitting on the back waiting.
You have
for the
to react.
You got to react.
Yeah. Now, so, and the thing that always bothered me about Longstreet's going around to the right thing is, how are you going to move a corps through there easily?
You're not. Right. And the thing is, it's important for people to know that there's two different Longstreet flanking maneuvers that he suggests. There's one for July 2nd, there's one for July 3rd. Mm-hmm. The one on July the 3rd I would describe as a tactical. That is, on the battlefield, let's go around the round tops and get around the enemy flank.
Right.
The one for July the 2nd is more strategic or operational. It's a grand maneuver. We're going to maneuver the whole army this time. The whole army is going to move to get between the enemy and Washington. Now, that is a tall order in enemy territory.
Especially because of where the army is positioned before that move has to be made. And not only that, but who is in between you, the Confederates, and where you want to line that army up. And it's the Union Army.
Right. And the other thing is, if you were Lee on the night of July the 1st, when you're having this conversation with Longstreet, you know where Buford's cavalry division is and 2 Union Army Corps. Mm-hmm. There's 5 unaccounted Union Army Corps and 2 cavalry divisions. You don't know where they are. So you're not going to attempt some sort of maneuver until you've identified where the whole Union Army is.
Right. Why was Longstreet, if you didn't want to fight there, and like Lee, he's got a point. He's like, we didn't want to fight here, but the fight is here.
Right.
Like, this is where it's happening, so get over it. What do you think? Now, I know, like, Longstreet, and we always try to think of the human side of this whole thing, because these are people that we're talking about. And they may be great people in the sense that, he rose to lieutenant general and, he's commanding a corps and all that stuff. But he's still a human being. A few months earlier, he lost how many of his children?
Well,
2 or 3?
He lost 3 children.
3 children. To scarlet fever in a week, I think it was, or within a couple weeks.
Right.
I don't care who the hell you are. That's gonna knock some wind out of your sails.
Yeah.
So now he's going up on this big adventure, into Pennsylvania, and Lee's kind of they're not agreeing on these things. It's a very human thing between him and Lee, to me. Mm. And he's acting like a human being who had just gone through that. I don't think you're going to get over that, soldier or not, in however many months it was since his kids died.
Yeah, sure. I think there's that. I think the other part of it is that when we look back at the Civil War, we elevate Lee to almost this godlike status.
Yeah.
And if you are in the shoes of Longstreet in 1863, Lee is not a god.
Right.
He is another general.
Yeah.
And you think that you have some better ideas than he does. You think that you could probably command this army pretty well. In fact, Longstreet's going to write to Joe Johnston. I forget if it was, I think it might have been in September of 63, and say to Joe Johnston, we could use you back in this army.
Really?
Command of this army. So he likes Lee, but he's not in awe of Lee like a lot of people are.
Right.
Because Longstreet has a high opinion of his own ability as a commander, and his decision-making ability. And he's got some right to have that feeling, because he's the person who led the devastating counterattack at Second Manassas. Mm-hmm. He was the person who essentially Lee had placed all the Confederate troops at Antietam when they arrived there on September the 15th. So Lee recognizes Longstreet's a very good tactician. In the Battle of Fredericksburg, the only penetration the Union Army makes is on Jackson's front, not on Longstreet's front.
Okay.
So he's a really solid commander, and he has a high opinion of himself.
Yeah. Now, Lee, you mentioned that he's elevated to this godlike status, and I think I'm sure this was before the Killer Angels, but from my reading of it, what was really annoying me about the book was how pious they made him. Mm-hmm. They made him seem, and they made other people's view of him seem like everybody was walking around worshiping this guy. And I'm sure I know there were people that thought very highly of him. But what really bugs me is, Lee seems to be, if you were to go by Michael Shara as history, and this book is history, while the battle's going on and all these things are happening, Lee's saying, that's great, it's in God's hands, and he's just walking around praying all the time. And I know there was that aspect of him that was very real, but I have a very hard time believing that while this battle is going on, he's just like, yeah, well, whatever, man. If God wills it, you know, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Lee was a very religious man, but he was very clinical. So he was not this, like in the novel. The way Lee comes up with the idea to make Pickett's charge on the third day is he's praying. And it kind of comes to him in his prayer, in a dream. He sees Pickett's Virginians going up the slope. Well, Lee didn't make decisions that way. I don't doubt that Lee probably prayed for success on the night of July the 2nd for July the 3rd, but he knew that he had to make smart decisions, and he is going to do a careful analysis. So his analysis is going to be, the Army of the Potomac has had 5 commanders in a year. This guy's been in command of the Army for 3 days, Meade.
Right.
So he's new to command. The constant turnover of commanders also can undermine morale. I've captured 5,000 prisoners from the Union Army in 2 days of fighting. That's always a sign things are going well. I drove them from the field on July 1. I drove their left flank in nearly a mile on July 2 and came within a whisker of winning the battle. We're winning the battle.
Right.
We are winning the battle. Now, the question is, where is the best chance of success? Because Lee's been in this tight spot before. If you look at Lee before he orders the flank march at Chancellorsville, Hooker's, in a way, has got him.
Yeah.
He's executed this brilliant maneuver.
Yeah.
Burnside at Fredericksburg, Burnside gets down to the Rappahannock River before Lee does. But the thing about Lee is he knows that there's a psychological element to warfare.
Yeah.
And he is a master at dominating his foe in psychological warfare. It's what he does with Joe Hooker. Because a lot of people think that at Chancellorsville, Lee marches around the Union flank, Jackson attacks, and battled over. That's not the case.
No.
Jackson attacks, routes the 11th Corps, but then the next day, Lee has to make these attacks. After Jackson's been mortally wounded, he has to make these attacks to drive the Union Army out of its position and combine the 2 wings of his army. And that is as bloody a fighting as occurs in any battle of the war. And he takes the position. But what Lee does is he calculates the odds. He's like Napoleon in that respect. Napoleon was a master at calculating the odds. Lee calculates the odds. I can put this many men on this front. Longstreet's telling me they're strong over here. Ewell's fighting over here. They can't be strong everywhere.
Right.
They have to be vulnerable somewhere. And when he looks at Pickett's charge, it's not like I'm just relying on the valor of my men. And my men will take this. He's relying upon the firepower of his artillery, because that worked very effectively at Chancellorsville. Pre-assault bombardment suppresses the enemy artillery fire, demoralizes their infantry. You rush them with the infantry assault, and you take entrenched positions at Chancellorsville. So they're not entrenched on Cemetery Ridge. They got stone walls, but they're not entrenched. So I think Lee felt this bombardment is going to demoralize the enemy. It's going to shake up their artillery, destroy a lot of it, and we're going to break through. It's going to work.
When I have friends or family come and visit, and I take them around, and if they know anything about the battle ahead of time, when, they want to see Pickett's charge, and we talk about Pickett's charge, and they're like, how could he be so stupid? Why would he do that? Because standing there with hindsight, you're like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen anybody do. But I always say to them, I go, well, this isn't his first time at bat.
Right.
Like, the guy's done things like this before, and it's worked.
It's a calculated risk.
Yeah. Like, it's not just out of thin air. It goes, oh, you know what? We haven't tried this in a while. Let's do this. He's done these things before, and you make a good point. The whole key is that bombardment, it wasn't just to break, some record. Right. Well, we want this one to be heard in Philadelphia, boys. Right. So let's make this really big. Get every gun we can get and all point it in one direction. No, there was a purpose, and that was to soften their defenses so that Pickett's 12,000 men or whatever could go over and take it with relative ease.
Well, what you're doing if you're Lee. The other thing about Lee is that we magnify him like he's some sort of a saintly individual, and that Lee cared about his men, but he could make that cruel type of arithmetic that a successful general has to make. How many men must I expend to take this point? So I think I'll lose a certain percentage of men, but I'll have a large enough percentage that I'll not only take that position, I'll hold it.
Okay.
And you think about those type of calculations the commander has to make. They're pretty cruel. I mean, I know I'm going to lose hundreds, maybe a few thousand men in this.
It's the silent trolley once again going by.
the quietest trolley in America.
God, those things are so loud.
Yeah, they are.
I don't know why.
I don't either.
Because the regular old buses are quieter than those things.
They are. Yeah.
All right, and what were you just saying before they rudely interrupted you?
It was about the sort of calculations that a commander that Lee makes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So he's. I mean, the thing about the movie also Gettysburg that Martin Sheen did a brilliant job in playing Lee as Lee was written in the book.
Yes.
That is how he played Lee.
Yep.
He didn't attempt to play Lee as historians have portrayed Lee. He played Lee as Lee was written in the book. And Lee in the book is a weak, ill man who's very religious, and religion informs a lot of his decisions. And the Lee that we know from the battle, from the written record, is a very decisive individual. He may not have been feeling that great, but I got to tell you, 3/4 of the army was not feeling great on a regular basis. That's true.
That's true. Yeah. Well, but you bring a good point, and this is a point we always bring up, and I'll say this every time we bring it up. We're not degrading the quality of our conversation here by bringing this up. But the guy had dysentery,
right,
and angina coming on, or the early stages of it, or something like that. So, without that, going through what those guys went through on a daily basis, I wouldn't be in great shape. Maybe physically I'd be a lot thinner, but I would not be. I would be exhausted. And now on top of that, I have to run to the outhouse every 5 minutes, and I got this fluttering in my chest, or whatever the hell angina is, and I'm old. I'm old. I'm tired. I'm not. My house is now a national cemetery almost, and life sucks. Like, it's pretty sucky right now.
Yeah, Lee had a razor sharp mind.
Yes.
I mean, and that's the way to think about him. Not as some kindly old gentleman who'd be a nice uncle to have. He had a razor sharp mind. He could make really tough decisions. He was a great guy to work for because he delegated very well. Like, he was not a micromanager.
Right.
He'd say, "Here's what I want you to accomplish. Now you work out the details. I'm not going to micromanage."
He trusted his subordinates.
He trusted his subordinates, and that did get him in trouble sometimes.
Did he have a sense of humor? Do we know?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He did.
There's a great book about Lee called "Reading the Man" by Elizabeth Pryor, who tragically was killed in a car accident a few years ago.
Oh.
And I highly recommend that book to people who want to get to know Lee, because Lee, particularly when he was a young man, had a tremendous sense of humor and loved women as well.
Yeah, we all did.
He reached a point in his life, though, where he started to assume certain responsibilities, and he felt that he needed to, present a different sort of person.
He needed to temper himself.
Yes. And he does do that. So he kind of becomes this more regal individual. But behind that he is a gambler. He is audacious.
Mm-hmm.
He has a tremendous amount of energy, even despite dysentery. When you look at him in the Battle of Gettysburg, I don't see any indecision whatsoever in Lee.
No.
Lee makes decisions throughout the entire battle, and he's decisive in his decisions. Where I think he gets a little bit confused is he's accustomed to, I had Jackson, I had Longstreet. Longstreet was kind of the anvil, and Jackson was the hammer. Now, Jackson might not agree with my plan, but once I told him this was the plan, he was all in. Now I come to Gettysburg. A.P. Hill's kind of a non-entity. Now, Ewell gets a bad rap in this battle. He hardly even figures in this book at all, but he's the only corps commander in Lee's army that obeys his orders and executes them flawlessly through the entire battle.
Yeah.
And then Longstreet, his right-hand man, is kind of at odds with him over everything he's trying to do in the course of this battle. And I think some of that, you wouldn't be human if it didn't throw you a little bit.
Sure. Absolutely, right. And you're talking about how they're at odds. In real life, the real history is that they were a little bit at odds with these things, and of course Shara is going to magnify that because that's drama, right? Ewell doing everything right, that's not drama, you know.
And the other thing about Shara and Lee is that Shara is also a reflection of the mood and the attitude towards Lee, the historiography of Lee. It goes up and it goes down. So you get and it's kind of now getting more into a kind of a middle ground.
Okay.
Like we're seeing Lee more for who he was. There's less of the deification of Lee. Yeah. But there was a period there where there was a condemnation of Lee. He couldn't have been that great. Here's all the things that he did bad. Here's why Lee wasn't a great commander. He only thought of Virginia. He didn't think strategically. He didn't understand politics. So some of that stuff's nonsense. He knew politics really well. But that's just the way history moves. I mean, you'll get people who they build someone up, and then there's another group who try to tear him down.
Yep.
And everybody's kind of selective in their use of the source material. And that it's rare that you find someone who comes along, like I think a great example of someone who's very objective is the Edwin Coddington, who wrote a great book on Gettysburg, the Gettysburg Campaign. Yeah. He's very objective about the different commanders. He doesn't have a favorite. He's letting the evidence inform his interpretation.
Yeah.
But that if you're writing a novel, that's boring. That's not that interesting.
Yeah, nobody cares about that.
Right.
Believe me, Pete, how many times have we tried to start the Coddington book?
Oh, it's so heavy. It's like a manual. It's like a technical manual on how to fight a battle.
It's literally heavy. Like to pick it up is a pain. But yeah,
it's a big book.
No, it is a big book, and it's mostly footnotes. I noticed. It seems like, well, maybe not mostly, but it seems like at least a third of the pages are footnotes or endnotes. Excuse me.
About that, what I'd say about Coddington is that, and this is why people find it heavy reading. Every sentence in Coddington matters.
Yeah.
And some people don't like that. They want some sentences to just kind of fly by, and he makes every sentence count. He doesn't bring the human element of the battle into it. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. I like the other stuff that you're talking about, command and strategy and politics and so on, but where's the human? Where's the human element here?
Where are the people?
And what I would say that Shara does exceptionally well is, and that is why the novel and the movie were so successful, is they really are successful in bringing the human element out of the battle.
Oh, it's all humanity.
Yeah.
Now, so let's move on to some other characters where you got that. You have Armistead. Armistead is, Granny Lee was Lee's nickname when he took command, but to me, the Granny in the movie and the book is Armistead. He sounds like an old lady. Like he's crying about Hancock and my best friend and everything. And like I said to you when we were eating dinner, is like, this is the first time you've noticed that you guys are on the other side of this thing. He's your best friend, and only now this is a big deal to you. Now I understand, for the sake of the book, he's got to point these things out and create these scenes. I think he just goes a little too far. It's a little too sappy, a little too dramatic. But how close in real life before the war were Armistead and Hancock? Were they even the same age?
Well, the one thing I'd say, though, is in the book, as far as the novel is concerned, it worked in the novel.
Absolutely.
It worked really well. I mean, and that was a really compelling story to a lot of people. Armistead and Hancock were friends before the war. They served in the same infantry regiment. They weren't always together because infantry regiments in the pre-war army were scattered all over the place. Generally a company here, a couple companies there, and so on. So they would run into each other once in a while, maybe serve at the same post. And they were at the same post in Los Angeles, California before the war. And that's when Armistead inscribed something to Hancock, and he made some statement in there about his decision to go with the Confederacy, and where he said, "You can never know what this has cost me." So, and I'm sure that was true, But this was a guy also, Armistead, who, and both of these, I've heard some people who studied the old army, the pre-war army, say that one of the reasons they liked each other is they were both kind of SOBs.
Okay.
All right? And a lot of other people didn't like them.
Ah, all right.
They were kind of sticklers.
So they had no choice but to like each other because nobody else did.
Right. No, I don't know if that's entirely true. I think, these army posts, they're lonely places.
Sure.
And you can forge really close relationships with people. So I have no doubt that they had a close relationship. But the other thing is that these men, they were very accustomed to the cruelty of warfare and the old army. Armistead, one of his children, I believe it was one of his children, and maybe his wife as well, he was out on some sort of a training exercise or maneuvers or something with his company or his part of his regiment. This is in the old army. And someone came out and they said, hey, your wife and your kid are on death's bed. So he rode back in. They died. He buried them. Got back on his horse. He rode back out and went on with doing the maneuvers and the training or whatever it was he was doing. But the point is that it wasn't that Armistead wasn't sentimental. It was that people like Armistead were like, I can't do anything for my wife and kid now. They've died.
He's practical.
I'm practical. This is my job. This is my career. I bury my children and I move on. I mean, it doesn't mean that maybe he didn't suffer some psychological effects of it.
Sure.
Very well may have. Mm-hmm. But so when he comes to Gettysburg, I think Armistead and Hancock, they're both the same way. They're like, hey, I really like that guy. I hope he doesn't get killed in the battle.
Right.
But I'm going to fight hard in this battle to win. I'm not pining for, he's over there and I know he's over there. And
can I send out a flag of truce?
No,
you think that'd be all right, Pete?
They're not doing that. They're just not doing it. They're professionals and they know what this game is, and it's a cruel game that they're playing. And
sure,
they understand it.
Now, when Armistead in the movie, and I believe this is also in the book, he's there up against the cannon. He'd just been shot.
Right.
The Union officers are helping him. He hears Hancock is down. Did he know that Hancock was down?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Did he have a conversation with the officers that were helping him?
He did have a conversation with one officer who was from Hancock's staff.
Okay.
And
so it's possible that information could have...
It is possible.
Okay.
Yes, because a lot of Union soldiers mention Armistead in letters that they wrote about the battle, because anytime you got a general, it was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So they got this generals in there. So a lot of people talked to him or saw him or knew he was there. And that was someone had to bring it to the attention of this officer of Hancock's staff, who came up into the area because once Hancock is wounded, then Gibbon is the corps commander for the 2nd Corps. He probably came up into the area of the angle. Maybe someone had told him that Armistead was up there. It's a big deal. It's a general officer. So he's going to want to see who it is. Mm-hmm. When he sees who it is, then here's Armistead. And Armistead, of course, because he may have known that Hancock commanded the 2nd Corps. That sort of intelligence might have been available to him. And he knows that these soldiers that he's fighting are in the 2nd Corps. This is Hancock's corps I was fighting against. I wonder what happened to Hancock. I wonder if Hancock's okay.
Could have asked him.
Now, the staff officer put all sorts of words into Armistead's mouth that are highly suspicious. He said that, please tell General Hancock I have done this great crime to my country, or something along those lines. That was... And
you're talking in real life?
In real life.
Right, okay.
The reason it's suspicious is that a surgeon who attended Armistead...
So get your damn Yankee hands off me.
Armistead reached into his pocket. He's at the Spangler Farm Field Hospital. He reached into his pocket. Now, this story may have been embellished as well, but it does tell us something about how Armistead felt. He reached into his pocket and he pulled out a handful of kernels of corn. And he held the corn up and he says, men who can subsist on this can't be whipped.
Oh.
And that's not somebody who's...
Why did he have kernels of? I guess because he was eating, is what you're saying.
He might have been eating. I find it. The Confederates ate pretty well in Pennsylvania. They weren't eating green corn.
But he was probably waiting for that moment, so he always carried a pocket full of corn.
We don't know. He probably fed it to his. He probably fed it to his horse.
Okay.
He probably fed it to his horse. Yeah. But what the point he was trying to make is that there was a point in time, the Antietam campaign, that a lot of our men subsisted on green corn and apples.
Yeah.
So he's saying men who can subsist on this, they can't be whipped.
Right. But no, I got you. Yeah.
Right.
So, so his attitude then isn't contrite and regretful like they showed in the movie or in the book with this.
Right.
Not both of us. Not all of us. Whole thing.
I don't think so.
Yeah. But so he's like even up till almost the bitter end. He's fighting for the cause.
He believes in it.
Even to the people that are trying to help him live.
I mean, the thing is that, it's inconceivable that someone is a general in the Confederate Army and they don't believe in what they're fighting for.
Yeah.
They believed in it. And they believed in it strongly. And they were willing to risk their life for it. So, the idea that he could have been regretful that maybe my boys killed Hancock, I regret that. That sort of stuff did happen during the war. But the idea that he's regretful that he served the Confederacy, no. I don't buy that.
We mentioned Hancock. Just an aside, my girlfriend found out that she had a relative in the 53rd Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah,
over by the Rose Farm. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. And they found his letters online. She found his letters online, and he has an account of Gettysburg, and he says, that Hancock was wounded. And he even mentions that they thought that the Confederates were down to shooting nails and things like that because he had the nail in him. Now, I don't know how he heard this.
Oh.
That must have been because I've heard that before, where for a while they thought that, until they realized that it went through the pommel of his saddle, that they thought that they were throwing nails or whatever they could in their muskets, and that's what he got hit with.
That actually came from Hancock.
That came from him.
He wrote a note to Meade that he had been wounded, and he said the enemy must be hard up for ammunition because they shot me with a 10-penny nail.
Okay. So
that's where it came from.
So now I'm very curious though to see, because I think it was dated only maybe at the most a week after the battle. So I'm curious to see like how it got from a communication to Meade from Hancock down to, I think he was a corporal.
I tell you, rumors in the Army, it is unbelievable how fast rumors and news flew.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
No, I bet.
So this staff officer tells this staff officer who tells this officer who tells this guy, and then it just
goes around,
radiates through the Army. It's amazing.
But you don't know how exciting that was to read.
That's really
she told me that she had the that she's like, oh yeah, look at these letters, here's one about Gettysburg, and I'm reading it and I go, oh, the nail, wow. Look at that's cool, that's true, they really thought that. Now, so let's go back to Armistead again, but now a different relationship. Garnett. Garnett, so there's a backstory with Garnett. They don't really get into it in the movie,
right?
As far as it goes with Jackson and accusing him of cowardice for withdrawing, and then Jackson getting killed, and that charge just hanging over his head. It's never been answered. How does that? Tell me that story first.
Well, Garnett was he was a regular Army soldier. He'd been in like Armistead and Hancock and Garnett had all been in the Army for 25, 27 years. So they had extensive Army experience. And Garnett also knew, I think he was in the same infantry regiment, so he knew Armistead and Hancock as well, and he had probably served with them at some Army posts. He is commanding the Stonewall Brigade, not just any brigade, the
Stonewall's Brigade.
In the Battle of Kernstown in the Shenandoah Valley Campaign in 1862. And they were, at one point in the battle, in an impossible position. And the only thing that Garnett could really do to preserve the brigade was to retreat. So he ordered a retreat. And the only problem was Jackson was observing that part of the battle, and he saw the Stonewall Brigade retreat, and he didn't feel the retreat was warranted. So he brought charges against Garnett. He wanted Garnett court-martialed. He accused Garnett of cowardice. And if you've ever known anybody in the military, even in the military today, to accuse someone of cowardice is a really big deal.
Sure.
It's a huge deal because your courage, particularly if you're a combat soldier, is paramount. So for Garnett, this is a huge mark on his reputation and record. But Lee realizes that Garnett's a very good officer. Jackson can be kind of hard on people, and he transfers Garnett. He says, we're not going to hold a court-martial. There's not going to be any court-martial. I'm going to transfer Garnett out of Jackson's command, and he transfers him over into Longstreet's command into Pickett's division.
Okay.
So when he comes onto the battlefield at Gettysburg, he's been kicked by a horse during the campaign, and it kicked him in the leg, and he was lame, so he can't walk very well. And when the order came out that all officers were to go into the attack dismounted, he ignored it. And we can understand why.
Sure.
If I use the order to stay out of the attack, I am the coward Jackson said I was.
Right.
I'm riding. So he goes into the attack mounted and gets killed.
Now, Armistead, is he really harping at him like a wife? And Pickett, you got to order him to, to walk and get off the, is he really making that big of a deal the whole time beforehand about Garnett riding in?
We have no idea.
We don't know.
That's all.
So there's
that's
no.
all
Okay,
made
that's
up.
all made up.
That's all made up.
I thought so.
Yeah,
I thought so. And now I also heard that Kemper was actually riding in as well.
Kemper did go in mounted as well.
But what I heard that in real life was that Armistead part of the way went in on a horse.
No, he was on foot the whole time.
Oh no. Okay,
Yeah.
so that was wrong then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Buford. He's the first, I believe he's the first Union officer we meet in the story. He's the head of the cavalry. He's the eyes and ears of the left wing of the Union Army under John Reynolds' command. That's all true. That's all depicted in the movie. How did they get Buford right, and how did they get Buford wrong? Or how does Shower get him wrong?
Well, in the movie, Sam Elliott did a tremendous amount of research into Buford. And he did really try to portray Buford as he thought Buford was.
Right.
He, of course, does have to as well portray Buford partly the way he's portrayed in the book. And the way he's portrayed in the book is he's kind of like, a lone gunfighter.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have any friends. He didn't want any friends.
Right.
He didn't even know the names of the men on his staff.
Yeah.
He's kind of this sardonic guy. But he's like the ultimate professional. He's seen it all. He's done it all. He's tired, but he still does his job. And he's like Longstreet. He's innovative. He's the guy who thought of the idea of fighting dismounted, even though their dragoons have been fighting dismounted for a long time, long before there even went an American army.
Right.
But the dragoons in the American army out in the West have been fighting dismounted. They've been trained to fight dismounted. So it wasn't that he was some innovator about stuff. He was just a really smart cavalry officer and a really good professional. And there was an edge to Buford. There definitely was an edge to Buford. He had a bit of a hard edge to him. He had a bit of that. Some of the character that Shera creates is true to life, but the one part of Buford that is not is Buford not only knew the names of everybody on his staff. He died in the arms of Miles Keogh, who would die with Custer the Little Bighorn.
Yeah.
Keogh was on his staff, and when Buford died, Keogh was holding him in his arms. When after the Battle of Gettysburg, either Keogh or somebody else on the staff was going to get married, and Buford knew about this. He was excited about it. He gave the person leave to go get married. So this was a guy who he really cared about the people on his staff. He knew them very, very well. And the other thing I'd say about him is he really cared about his men. Part of the reason he gets sick and he ends up dying is he shares all the hardships of his men. He refuses to take any extra benefits or any extra leisure because he's a general. He eats the food they eat. He lays on the ground like they do. But the other thing he does that they don't do, he's probably up like 20 hours a day, 18 hours a day, They're sleeping more than that.
Yeah.
He's not. He's planning. He's writing orders. He's busy. So it wore him down. But he was. When you look at Buford's casualties that he suffers in the different actions, they're always lower than the other guys.
So he's careful with his men.
But he always does. He accomplishes his mission. So if you look at what he does at Gettysburg, he loses on the first day of the battle in an entire division 129 men. And some of those are prisoners that got captured.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Really?
129 men.
So about out of 2,000, right?
Right.
Wow.
There's 129 casualties, and that's killed, wounded, captured, and missing. Yet he accomplishes his mission, which is to delay the Confederate infantry long enough for the Union infantry to reach the field. And then not only does he do that, when the Union Army retreats on July the 1st, he covers their retreat, and he protects the flank,
right,
both the right and the left flank. Although on the right flank, his brigade that was protecting the right flank got shelled by Union artillery because they couldn't tell that was Union cavalry at that distance. But
so in the movie, though, and I think in the book too, they portray it as no, it was 129 total casualties or killed.
No, total
casualties.
Right. Yeah.
So they portray it like in the movie. He, when he's at Meade's headquarters. And Hancock is there, actually. Meade's not up yet.
Right.
And Hancock asks how he's doing. He goes, well, I'd like to get refitted. And,
right.
Oh, yeah, we'll see to it. That they weren't that beaten up.
Or does
he just mean I need more ammo?
What he's referring to is Buford is saying, my men have been in the saddle every day for weeks. Our horses are worn out. Our equipment's worn out. My men are worn out. And I need a resupply and a re-equip.
Okay.
Because we're getting to the point that even though I have enough men, we're not effective as a cavalry unit. That's what he's saying. And so some people look at a cavalry unit and they're like, well, Buford only took 129 casualties. Why isn't he? Well, you need horses. And the horses got to move the men around. And if the horses are giving out and a lot of your men are dismounted, your effectiveness of your unit goes way downhill. That's what Buford's saying.
Okay.
That's what he's saying.
Okay. I got it. So the portrayal of Buford, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how close to the real Buford is that?
I'd give it more, 10 being he's exactly like Buford, probably like a 6 or a 7.
Okay. Well, that's not bad.
And it's good. I mean, and maybe even a little bit, maybe an 8 with Elliot in the movie, because Elliot did so much work to try to understand Buford.
Did you work on the movie at all? Were you around like as a consultant or anything, or did you do anything like that?
I was not a consultant. I was in the movie.
You were in the movie?
I was in one scene.
Oh, wait. Is this going to be like my teacher in high school? You're going to pause the scene, show us where? Wait, let me see. Were you a Union guy or a Southern guy?
I was in the 20th Maine.
Oh, I've actually seen this somewhere. Yeah.
We they were making this movie.
Yeah.
And it was in September. So a group of us were like, how many times are they going to make a movie in Gettysburg? And they're asking for extras because most of the reenactors now had left because it's September. People have gone back to school and jobs and everything like that. So we thought, well, you know what? Let's just do it. So we all picked a day that they knew they needed somebody. And we didn't know what they were even filming.
Okay.
We just knew they wanted either Union or Confederate soldiers. So we all got Union soldier gear and we went out. And it was the day that they filmed the Bayonet Charge, the 20th Maine. They filmed a lot of the fighting on the left flank of the regiment, and then they filmed the Bayonet Charge. And it was eye-opening. I mean, it was really interesting to be out there and be in it.
That wasn't shot on the actual...
No, it was shot out towards Fairfield.
Okay.
And on a hillside in Fairfield that, it did a good enough job resembling...
It looks a lot like it, yeah.
Yeah, it did a good job
except
resembling...
for the road. It's not, there's no road. Yeah. But yeah, it looked a lot like it. Okay, so now, let's see here. Okay, Hood. General Hood, which, by the way, we're going to have Patrick Orman on in October. They're coming out for a screening and reunion.
Oh, I heard something about that. Yeah, right.
And so that should be interesting because I love getting into filmmaking talk and that'd be fun. But anyway, so General Hood, how old is he in real life?
Yeah, he was a fairly young man.
Yeah. So Patrick Orman, I think, was a little older.
Yeah.
At that point, but he did a really good job.
He did a good job.
I don't even know how closely he got to the real Hood, but the character is a memorable character.
Yes, and I think that's what a good actor does.
Yeah.
Is they want to try to be close to the person, but they have to give the character something that makes them memorable.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Hood really was arguing to move around to the right, but not the way Longstreet wanted to move around to the right? Like it was a different move around. He just wanted to go around the round tops.
Yes. Yeah.
But Longstreet, at that point, was Longstreet happy with doing just that, or is he still wanting to go all the way around?
Longstreet has just made up his mind. We're going to do what Lee wants to do.
Okay.
So, Hood goes to him 2 or 3 times. Like, this is a bad idea. This is a really bad idea. Because I think when Hood comes up into position, Hood is behind McLaws' division, so McLaws is the first to deploy. Hood cuts across the Beesacker farm, which is today the Eisenhower farm, to come up into position. And like any good soldier, and Hood was a very good soldier in that he conducted reconnaissance. So he's going to try to go, he probably rode ahead of his men or with his skirmish line, and he's going to try to get a gauge of the strength of the Union position and the amount of opposition that's in front of him.
Okay.
And I think what Hood saw was enough to convince him that we're not going to accomplish anything here. This is not a good place to attack. This is a bad battle plan. We can't attack up the Emmitsburg Road. That's an impossibility. Now I don't think he thought anybody was on Little Round Top yet, but he may have suspected there was someone moving there, and he is going to go to Longstreet 2 or 3 times, saying, "Can we modify these orders?" And Longstreet's going to tell him every time, "No, it's General Lee's wishes. You'll obey your orders. Attack up the Emmitsburg Road." So he's kind of forced to do something that he didn't think was a good idea, and of course he gets hit almost at the very beginning of his attack.
Right.
So that created a lot of command confusion for the Confederates on that side.
Right. So he's hit by a shell, right?
A shell, yeah.
Or a shell fragment,
Yeah.
And then command goes to Law.
Right.
But Law is in command of his brigade.
Right.
But I found this out not too long ago. I was doing a ranger walk up there, and they said that Law, he's in command of his brigade, but he doesn't leave the brigade. He commands the division from with his brigade. Is that true?
That may be true. There was a little bit of a lag there to find him.
Right.
First off, you have to find him. Then, if you're Law, you have to then notify your senior colonel that you're now in command of the brigade. You also have to find out where are all the other brigades at.
Right.
And maybe ask the staff, were there any orders that Hood gave or intentions that he had that I'm not aware of? Because if you're Law, you probably heard from Hood, the orders are to attack up the Emmitsburg Road. That's our plan. All right, that's what we're going to do. So he's given some sort of general guidance to Law. But beyond that, Law doesn't know what he said to the other 3 brigade commanders, or maybe what he might have done once the attack jumps off. So he's got to sort that out. It's possible he stayed near his brigade. I would find it very hard to believe that he stayed right with his brigade. I don't find any evidence that he did.
Okay.
I think he stayed somewhere down below Big Round Top in the valley.
Yeah, that makes sense, because which is where part of his brigade was, right?
Right.
Because the story was that the 15th Oates was up on Big Round Top, and he goes, "Oh man, if I can get a battery up here."
Right.
And so he sends down to Law, who was, I think the guy even said he was down at the bottom of Big Round Top, and Law says, "No, you've got to go now. Like, get down there, get up on the little hill."
Yeah.
But that would then, that's what I think gave me the idea that he's commanding the division from his brigade.
Yeah, what happened was Oates, 15th Alabama, reached the summit of Big Round Top, and then they'd gone up one of the steepest parts of the hill. Not the steepest, but pretty steep. And
which I don't know how you go up that without water. And after marching as far as they did,
these guys were tough.
Remember, Pete? Remember we tried to do that? We climbed up to the top where
the footprints of the observation tower that used to be up there were. Remember that?
Yeah.
I remember we were like 27 and we got halfway up there and we had to stop and we were like just like gasping for air.
Yeah.
Trying to do
spent a
that.
lot of time at the top.
Yeah, it was about 2 days later we finally went home.
Yeah, it's these guys were tough. I mean, they were really toughened by campaigning, but you know, Oates even says some of my men were fainting.
Oh, I would imagine
Exhaustion.
they have to.
Some guys were. So he gives his men a breather, and I think he's exhausted as well. That's why, because he's an aggressive guy. He's a naturally aggressive person, but I think he's exhausted. He gets up on top of the hill and he's trying to think of ways, reasons why I shouldn't keep moving. And then this staff officer from the division staff rides up to him. So he rode his horse up to the summit.
He was
of
the
Big Round
smart
Top.
one, yeah.
He gets up there and he tells Oates, your orders from General Law, he's in command of the division, are to move down and attack the Yankee flank. And then that's when he says to this staff officer, hey, but look, this is like a Gibraltar.
Yeah.
You know, we
Right.
don't want to give this up. I mean, we can fortify it. He goes, I'm not here to discuss,
Right.
you know, tactics.
Move.
Go.
Yeah.
So that's what happens there.
Now, okay, so we go from Hood to Law to Oates, and let's go to Oates's counterpart, Chamberlain. All right. First of all, let's get this out of the way. The whole "Don't Call Me Lawrence" thing, totally for the book and for the movie, or was there a truth to that where him and Tom had that like thing going where Tom couldn't understand that it's his brother, but it's the colonel of the regiment.
Yeah, probably. I mean, one of the things in the book is there's a lot of familiarity.
Yeah.
That and I know, you know, these were volunteer military organizations, but sometimes people take that too far. They were a professional military organization by 1863. This was a regiment that had been trained by Adalbert Ames, who's a West Point graduate, and he put West Point discipline on this regiment. That's part of the reason why they do so well.
They do what they do.
He
Yeah.
trained Chamberlain on how to be an officer. So the idea that Chamberlain's going to walk into a tent and talk to a sergeant who he's busted to private and talk about the regiment, not a chance.
Okay.
Never going to happen.
Well, all right. Let's get into that, and let's start off with a spoiler alert for those of you who don't know this already. Buster Kilrain never existed. That is Michael Shara speaking through that character that he made up.
Yeah.
Because I don't see how. First of all, what did he do? They don't really explain it. It was something to do with drinking, I think, where he went from sergeant to private, right?
Right.
Yet he's this short little fat leprechaun who is like 60 years older than Chamberlain, so he's like in his 80s or 90s, and he's giving the colonel advice and addressing him common, you know, like darling and all that stuff. Yeah. And having deep philosophical conversations about slavery.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, again, we understand the devices that you have to use for fiction and for novels and things like that. However, that to me was always kind of a little hard to take. I couldn't understand that part.
Yeah. I mean, a well-disciplined infantry regiment is going to have a strict hierarchy that they follow. And Chamberlain, however, you know, he's really highly respected in the regiment. And he's respected, like one of the soldiers in a letter that he wrote before the Battle of Gettysburg, it was during the campaign, when Chamberlain gets sunstroke, heat exhaustion, and you know, he's absent from the regiment for a few days. And the soldier's writing, he's like, boy, you know, I really hope he gets back before we get into a battle because we have a lot of confidence in him. But he said that one day they had to throw up some breastworks. And he says, wouldn't you know it? But he says the colonel threw off his jacket and started helping the men throw the breastworks up. So Chamberlain understands the mind of the volunteer soldier and what motivates him. He understands that they have to have discipline, so he will have discipline in the regiment. He's not going to talk to a sergeant that he's busted to private. that's not going to happen.
Right.
Because how do all your sergeants who've kept their nose clean, who are really good guys, I mean, how do those guys perceive that?
Right.
Yeah, that erodes discipline completely.
Yeah.
And Chamberlain, it's been beat into his head by Ames. One of the most important things that you can have is discipline. You have to have discipline, because that's going to enable you when you're exchanging fire with the Confederates who are coming at your front and you see another force threatening your flank. That's going to enable you to maneuver your regiment under fire, which is an exceptionally difficult maneuver they carried out, to refuse the flank to face this coming flank attack. And so Chamberlain, yes, I mean, that's sort of familiarity in the regiment. And the idea that I think maybe inside a tent, they're going to call him Lawrence, his brothers, in the field, it's Colonel. I mean, it's lieutenant.
Like, he's not going to make that mistake, especially after, when were they mustering? It was 62?
62.
So after all that time in the Army, he still hasn't gotten in the habit of calling his brother Colonel in front of people.
Right. No, it's not gonna
I mean, you're right. I could see it in the tent.
Right.
But it's out in public. And you know, so now you mentioned he has a sunstroke, the heat exhaustion, whatever it was. Is that what they're referring to when Buster first comes in and he goes, seeing as you've been down with the heat, would the Colonel ride the damn horse or whatever?
Yes.
That's what he's talking
That's what
about?
he's talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I always wondered what that was referring to. Okay, so now we've got that out of the way. Buster never existed. So for people that, and I actually have had people, it's a fantastic character. You know what it reminds me of is the... in the old John Ford movies, he's the Victor McLaughlin.
Yes.
You know, the burly sergeant who just, you know, says what he says and it doesn't matter. And the captain puts up with it.
He's the sergeant who's the font of all wisdom, but he doesn't. But he
can't get past sergeant.
He doesn't want to be any higher.
Oh,
he doesn't want to be an officer.
Because it's easier to drink as a sergeant.
Exactly.
Because the officer, you'll do what the officers don't want to be bothered doing with the men, so they'll let you drink your whiskey. Yeah, and you're Irish, so of course it just goes with that. So Buster doesn't exist. So when you come here and you ask, what happened? Where did they take Buster after he died, and where did they bury him? The answer is nowhere, because he never existed. Okay.
Right. Now there was a Sergeant Buck in the 20th Maine.
Yes.
Who does get killed.
He mentions him.
He does. Yeah. He mentions Buck at one point. So there's no Buster Kilrain, but there is a Sergeant Buck.
Okay. All right. So now let's talk about the fight of the 20th Maine versus the 15th Alabama, because over the years, I never really got into this too deep with people, but I've heard, you know, there's kind of a camp of, Chamberlain was a good writer and Shara was a good embellisher. Mm-hmm. And so now people believe that, you know, these great miracles occurred on Little Round Top. And then there's other people saying, no, what he did was, you know, pretty remarkable considering all this stuff. And then they list all the different things and all that other stuff. How close is the portrayal of that battle in the book and in the film to reality? Like, was it, did Chamberlain have somebody, the only one person paying attention to what's going on down in the hill when Chamberlain's talking is this sergeant that doesn't exist? Here they come, sir.
Yeah.
But first of all, did they get pushed back and reform and come back that quickly, or were there more lulls in between? I mean, let's not forget, these guys are exhausted. They marched how many miles that day? 35?
Almost 30.
Almost 30. Mm-hmm. And they have no water. They sent a detail out to take all the canteens to fill with water, but those guys got captured.
Right.
So now they're and that's why they were hanging out. They were kind of catching their breath and waiting for the water up on top of Big Round Top.
Right.
But then they're ordered to go down and attack, or they don't even know about attacking. They don't know what's on Little Round Top at this point, right?
They find out pretty quick.
Yeah, but they don't know that the 20th Maine is down there.
Right.
So they get down there, and now they've got to get the 20th Maine out of the way. No water, 30-mile march, hot as hell, and your rest was interrupted. So how realistic is it that they would have been pushed back and then, okay, get back together. All right, let's go again. Like, how quickly does that happen?
Well, we're using that numerical ranking 1 to 10.
Yeah.
I would actually give the book and the film like a 5, because there's aspects of it that I think Shera writes. I think it's one of the best parts of the book. Actually, I mean, he writes that part of the battle exceptionally well.
Yeah,
and
beautiful.
Some parts of it that he writes, I think, are good. They're pretty good, but there's a lot of embellishment and just silly things that never would have happened. And the other part about it is, particularly in the movie. And I remember this when we were out there, we were filming it, is the Confederates would all recede, and then pretty soon they come marching up the hill. Here they all come again.
Yeah.
Here comes everybody. Well, the reality of the battle was when Chamberlain's regiment is formed up and the Confederates first hit the Union line, they hit to his right. So the first firing he hears is over the hill. That's the 16th Michigan, the 44th New York. Then the fire spreads to the 83rd Pennsylvania, and then he can see the men coming towards the 83rd and his right. That's the 47th Alabama, and his men open fire
into the 47th
Yes.
right flank.
Kind of into their right front, because they're coming at the 20th Maine and the 83rd PA.
Okay.
So they're firing. They're engaged. So. If you've been around, 380 men firing guns, it's loud.
Not recently, but yes.
Right. It's really loud. I mean, it's and there's a lot of smoke from it. Then one of his lieutenants comes to him, and if you read different accounts by Chamberlain, he always tells this story a little bit differently. In fact, one story he even cut out the lieutenant totally.
Okay.
And I don't come down hard on Chamberlain, because he's telling the story over and over again, and he's getting older all the time. And as we were talking earlier, is a lot of times you start to begin to make yourself more and more the central character. But this lieutenant comes to Chamberlain and he says there's a movement on our left. So they could see, some of the men on the left of the regiment could see Confederates coming down the hill that were going to threaten their flank. That's the 15th Alabama.
Okay.
Chamberlain writes he climbed up on a rock. That rock is still down there. Which one it is, we don't know. But he would have really exposed himself to do that.
Right.
So he must have felt they had pinned down the 47th enough, it was safe enough to climb up and get a view. He sees, yes, confirmation that Confederates are coming and they're moving fast. So he acts really quickly. And I think this shows the training of the regiment, and this shows his knowledge of tactics. He issues an order to refuse the left flank, to refuse the left four companies. But it's not just the four left companies breaking back and forming a new front. It is the other five companies thinned to a single rank to make one, to cover the same frontage that the regiment had. You have 10 companies in the 20th Maine, right? One company is sent out as flankers. So you have 9 companies.
Company B.
Yep, Company B. You have 9 companies left. You want your 5 companies that are still online to spread themselves out to cover the frontage that 9 companies covered.
Against how many more men than what you have? What were the...
Well, the thing is, you've got the 47th Alabama pinned down, and the 15th Alabama has probably about 150 more men, maybe 200 more men.
But they're coming up the hill.
They're coming.
So
they're going to try to come up the hill, against you. But the tricky thing is issuing the order under fire, all this noise and confusion. I want the 5 companies that are going to stay on this frontage to cover the entire frontage of the regiment, and I want these 4 companies to refuse the line. Now you have to deliver orders in a way that these men, in their minds, understand. They've been trained to do these things because they've done them on the drill field. So they can execute it without you having to stand there and explain something, because you don't have time to do that.
You got to use a shorthand.
It's got to be really quick. And they execute the movement. And that, to me, that was a tricky maneuver to do under fire.
Okay.
So it was good. It was a really good maneuver. Now, the interesting thing is that, once they get into this big fight, 15th comes up. All right. The 15th probably made one concerted assault against the 20th Maine as a regiment.
Okay.
When that initial assault was repulsed, and Oates is the source, he says, my men, the fire upon us was the heaviest fire I ever experienced in the war. It was like walking against the wind. It was a really terrific fire the 20th Maine delivers. It's very accurate. Once that's happened, the idea that Colonel Oates can command in that environment his entire regiment, all 10 companies, to do what he wants them to do. Absolutely impossible.
It's over.
So from that point on, what the battle is going to degenerate into is you're going to get movements by 2 or 3 companies. Maybe that's about all people can see you and maybe hear you shouting and yelling. And you're going to get these groups of men to make these rushes. Because we know that they rush up onto that space, which today is trampled, where the left flank of the 20th Maine was.
Yeah.
And both Oates and Chamberlain and other men who were there are sources that the battle swayed back and forth. Because if you go out there with some people and have people come up like the 15th Alabama and then go through the pantomime of loading and firing a Civil War rifle, what you'll see is that you have to fall back as you're loading the weapon. And they're coming at you. Now they discharge their weapon at you. Now their gun's empty. Now they're maybe going to fall back as they're trying to reload, and you start to move towards them.
Okay.
So the battle is going to sway back and forth over that ground.
Now, is it also true that when he refuses the left, the angle that the regiment, the shape of the line makes is more, I have to remember my geometry terms here, obtuse? It's wider? Is that right? Is that the word I'm looking for? And then with each assault, it's almost back on itself. The whole line, it's more of an acute angle.
Yeah, he said at one point, Chamberlain wrote at one point, it was almost like a hairpin.
Yeah.
That had been pushed back that far.
Yeah. And that's the point where you just say, all right, we got to charge.
No, because he gets pushed back, and then it'll push back, and it goes back and forth. And the moment that he decides to make the charge, this is the point where history and the book, and the other thing is, I would say in Shera's defense, is that he has to write the book kind of the way he did for the reader to understand these things.
Of course, yeah.
So he has Chamberlain, gather all of his officers around him under this terrific fire, and he starts diagramming this thing. And in the book, Lieutenant Melcher says, "What's a right wheel, sir?" Not a chance that's going to happen.
Right.
Melcher was a really sharp guy. He was an excellent officer. And
this isn't their first time in a battle.
No.
I mean, they're a year old.
And the other thing is they've done a lot of training. They absolutely know how to execute a right wheel. They've executed.
Well, Ames forgot to tell them that part.
Yeah, right.
It was everything else.
But so they've reached the point where the right companies, we don't know if it's all 5 or whether it was like 3 or 4, the right companies of the regiment, they've been doing the most firing. Because remember, they started to fire first.
Right.
They've done the most firing. They're beginning to run low on ammunition. So Chamberlain has some officers coming to him. They're sending people to him and they're saying, we're almost out of ammunition. He's got some officer or officers who come to him. He never identifies who they are. And he says, we're hearing firing in the rear. It sounded like the Rebs were in their rear. We should fall back. Now that is a natural tendency for someone. The situation's uncertain. We don't have a map that shows us where everybody is. It sounds like they're in our rear. We're going to get cut off. If we don't fall back, we're done. Let's fall back and regroup and figure out where we are. So he's got some people who are advocating this. Then he gets Lieutenant Melcher, comes up to him, and he says, "Sir, I'm asking permission to advance my company." I think it was Company F. Because some of his men, he was the color company. So the colors, and they attract the heaviest fire. And he had a number of wounded who were laying between the lines. And there's no doubt in my mind, those wounded guys were shouting at their buddies, "Get me out of here.
Yeah.
Get me out of here."
Sure.
So he says, "I want to advance my company to get my wounded, to cover my wounded and get them in." And it's at that point that Chamberlain, he makes this split-second decision, and it's a really audacious decision. It's like, we're going to charge. He says, "I'm about to order a charge." He says to Melcher, "Go back to your company." Then Chamberlain says, "The only command I gave was fix bayonets." And he said nobody heard anything else after that, because he said as soon as the men near me heard the command fix bayonets, they started yelling, and the yell started to spread along the regiment. And Ellis Spear, who's a captain acting as major, commanding the left wing of the regiment, he writes in a letter he wrote after the war. He's like, I didn't even know what was going on. I never got any orders.
What I've heard was he ordered the bayonets, and this color guard that you're talking about, even though they didn't have permission to go forward and get the guys, that a few of them, including the guy carrying the flag,
Tozier,
goes forward to grab a kid and pull him in, and Ellis Spear only sees the flag go forward.
No, what Spear wrote is that he had no idea what was going on. He had no communications with Chamberlain during the entire fight.
Okay.
Which you can understand.
Sure,
They're
yeah.
busy.
Yeah.
He said, I heard a shout. I saw the colors go forward, and I saw the regiment start to move. And with the intuition of a good soldier, he realizes, oh, we're going at him. So the other thing that's interesting about this is that what Spear says, if you read his account carefully, he doesn't do a right wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Spear charges straight ahead, and the Confederates of the 15th Alabama in his front were confused. So they ran to the rear.
And he just followed him.
Well, when they ran to the rear, they ran towards the Weichert farm on the Tawnytown Road.
Okay.
So he writes to his granddaughter years later about how these Confederates, these rebels, went into this lane. Well, it's the lane to the Weichert farm.
Uh-huh.
And that they had to shoot some of them, and then a bunch of them surrendered to him. So what happens in the attack is we want to imagine it as this really fluid maneuver that everybody kind of wheeled around, and Chamberlain ordered this right wheel. And Chamberlain never ordered a right wheel. He ordered bayonets, and then he shouted charge, but he says, in the Hosanna of all the yelling, nobody could hear me. His guys go running down the hill. They catch the Confederates at the moment that Oates is issuing an order to try to get his men to retreat. And not easy to communicate to your entire regiment that's kind of strung out and spread out and behind cover everywhere. This is the signal when we're going to retreat, and we're going to go back the way we came. So some of his men got confused. They went the wrong way. They ran to the east, and Spear chases them. The rest of the 20th Maine pursues the Confederates, and as they pursue the Confederates retreating to Big Round Top, they execute a right wheel. So if you're Chamberlain and you're writing your report after the battle is over, you're not going to write all of this stuff.
Right.
Trying to explain
You just
everything.
give the basic.
What you do is you write in the language that your superior officer understands.
Right.
We executed a right wheel. Because that is, in a sense, what they did do.
So now, and this isn't to take away from anything that they did by correcting the record here, because it is a vastly different story from what the book and the movie portray.
Right.
The book and the movie portray it as a very neat maneuver, a very coordinated maneuver.
Right.
But really, it sounds to me like the 20th Maine versus 15th Alabama part of the fighting begins and ends with nicks of time, because Chamberlain and the 20th are placed there just in the nick of time before. Like, if Oates didn't stop to pause, they probably would have been up on Little Round Top, correct?
Might have been.
Okay. When Chamberlain is in position, it's like 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
Maybe 10 minutes. Yeah, it was pretty quick.
And then the 20th or the 15th Alabama attacks, okay?
Right.
So he gets there in the nick of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're saying that as all this chaos is going on and the charge is beginning down the hill, Oates is ordering a retreat.
Right.
So it just so happens that the charge...
They catch him in just the... He has luck. I mean, Chamberlain has
a lot of luck.
He has good luck that day.
So, and it's not that see, and this is kind of what bothers me with the whole novelization of history, or even the portrayal of history and trying to say that it's true, like in a movie or whatever, but that's still novelization. But it's not that we don't have accounts of what happened with the 20th Maine.
We have a lot.
We have a lot of accounts.
Right.
Yet this story has taken on a mythical...
Yes.
And to me, I find it... I almost find the real story a little more exciting than the fake story.
I think the real story is actually far more interesting, because it's more complex, and it is a more interesting story than because the other one is greatly simplified.
Right.
to make it easier for someone to understand. And it also elevates Chamberlain as well. I mean, he becomes this central character, and without him, nothing else happens. And I mean, Chamberlain, you know, there's always been this movement in the times that I worked at the park. It was always a movement to erect a monument to Chamberlain. What we would always respond is there was a letter that Chamberlain wrote. We had in the park files that while he was alive, someone had suggested a monument to Chamberlain on Little Round Top. And he says, I have one. It's to my regiment, 20th Maine. I was a part of that regiment. That's my monument. And I think that's how Chamberlain had an ego like anybody did.
Sure.
I don't think Chamberlain was an egotistical person. That does not come out at all in the letters that soldiers wrote about Chamberlain or in their diaries when they wrote about him. He comes across as a very non-egotistical individual. But he's a really great writer. And again, as he gets older, you know, I mean, the story maybe gets a little bit better and you become a little bit more of a central character, and it becomes easier to attack.
Probably because it's the only name you can remember.
And you become easier to attack later on. You know, I mean, the thing is that he had a lot of casualties. People sometimes they stand on Little Round Top and they're like questioning Chamberlain. I'm like, okay, now let me have a bullet whack the person next to you in the skull. And this guy gets hit in the artery and blood's gushing all over the place. And now you make that decision.
Right. What would you do? Yeah.
So it becomes a different story then when you're confronted with what he had to deal with.
It's so that's what it's a temptation to do this when you hear these stories, but I always try to not do that because I'm not there. I've never been in that situation or anything remotely close to it, and I hope I never am. And it's just for us to sit and just analyze it and figure out how it happened and what happened, and then just tell people. You know,
well, you know, you can
have your opinion, but don't be a douche.
You can critically analyze commanders in the Civil War based upon how they were trained and how did they perform based on that training that they had. Because some commanders failed and some commanders really succeeded and some commanders did okay some days and not so good on other days. And that's completely legitimate. It's when you discount everything else and just because somebody got made famous, like Chamberlain. He didn't ask to be made famous.
Right.
I mean, Sherrow wrote a great book. Ron Maxwell made a good movie, and those things elevate Chamberlain, and people just identify with this guy. And he's a compelling individual.
He's very interesting. I mean,
interesting guy.
The guy gets shot later through the bladder, or urethra, or something.
Right.
I mean, really bad. And if he weren't a general, he probably would have died because they wouldn't have gotten the care that he had received, right?
The interesting thing about that story is that's how he became a general.
No, that's right. He was a colonel.
He was a colonel, and Grant made the only battlefield promotion to general that he did in the war.
Because he thought he was going to die.
He thought he was going to die.
So then he lives, survives, goes on, ends the war as a major general.
Yes.
And
brevet major general.
Actually accepts the surrender of Lee's army, is that correct? Or
when Lee's troops came up and laid down their arms, Chamberlain's brigade was the one that was selected to be the unit that received the stacking of the arms and the colors, which was a huge honor.
Sure.
It was a huge honor.
And he was from what I've read, I'm becoming more and more fascinated with him, and I want to read a biography or two about him. But he's a very fascinating guy. He seems very humble, yet he does some pretty remarkable things, and he's got a set of balls on him. He's a brave guy.
He does, yeah.
There's a story in Gods and Generals when he's at Fredericksburg, and he has to sleep between the dead bodies and cover himself with their jackets and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's amazing what these people can go through. And then he goes on after the war to become the governor of Maine. Right. How many times?
2 times. At least 2 times. It might have been 3 times.
President of Bowdoin College.
Right.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, he had to leave Bowdoin College and basically lie. He wanted to leave to go to fight in the war, and they said, no, we're not going to give you a sabbatical. And he said, fine, then I'm going to go over to Europe or something like that, and then he joins up.
Right.
Yeah. How many college professors would do that today?
I don't know if it actually happened that way, but that makes a really great story.
It's a great story.
And he... he clearly was a guy who was a true citizen soldier and a patriot and wanted to do his part in the war and didn't have to. He didn't have to. He could have stayed at Bowdoin.
Yeah. No, yeah. He could have used that as an excuse, but he went and did it.
Yes.
Now, a couple other things with Chamberlain in the movie and the book and everything. We know the whole "Don't Call Me Lawrence" and his brother Tom and everything. And Tom really was a lieutenant with the 20th Maine. Mm-hmm. But there was also another Chamberlain brother there, John. Was it John or
I forget the
or
other
Sparky Chamberlain? I think.
I don't think it was Sparky. I forget the other
I can't remember his name either, but the other brother Chamberlain, he wasn't in the regiment though, right? He was a preacher or a sanitary.
He had some type of a civilian position.
Yeah. But in some way, whether it was medical or spiritual or some way giving aid and comfort to the soldiers. Right. So the hard day for Mother part when the shell goes off is actually true.
Yeah, I think Chamberlain writes about that.
But it was all three of them that were together.
Yes, they were when the brigade was marching out of the wheat field and marching up towards Little Round Top, and some of the Confederate batteries were shelling Little Round Top. That's supposedly when that happened. And I think Chamberlain...
And they show that in the movie.
Yeah, I think Chamberlain did write about that.
Right. But there's no third brother depicted in the book or the movie, but there is one there for real.
Yeah.
Also, and this always... At first, I didn't pick up on it, but then it really started to bug me when I learned more about who was in command of who and who was in what corps and everything. Okay, first of all... I guess it's early morning of the third day. Chamberlain is sitting up on the boulder. It's supposed to be Big Round Top, but it was really Little Round Top, but they shot it on. And he's up there talking with Tom, blah, blah, blah. And then this winded lieutenant comes up and says, you're relieved. You guys get to come back and take a rest. And he goes, oh, yeah, where are we going? Oh, safest spot in the field, right smack dab in the middle. Nice quiet spot. First of all, the idea... that a regiment would be taken off the line and then moved to a sector that is not even commanded by or held by that regiment's corps is kind of goofy. But then also, why are you just moving them for rest to another part of the line and not the rear? Right. But this is a device that Shara has to use in order to have him witness
Pickett's charge.
Right. Okay. Yes. So in reality, now in the movie, he reports to Hancock, and Hancock's, well done, sir. I expect don't worry, everybody's too hot and nobody's going to do anything, and that whole thing. But in the book, it correctly has it as Sykes. Right. And I say correctly in that Sykes was the 5th Corps commander and the 20th Maine was in the 5th Corps. Right. But would a colonel have reported directly to a corps commander?
Probably not.
Probably not. He would have reported to the brigade commander and it would have gone all the way up, right?
Yes.
Okay, so even in the book, even though they got the right general right, the fact that he would report to him is... incorrect.
Well, the only way that something like that would have happened, and in the 20th Maine's case, I don't think it did happen, but the only way that would happen is if a regiment was detached, then the order would come down through the corps commander down to the brigade commander, who would tell Chamberlain, you're being detached and you're to report to General Hancock.
Okay. Because
they need some reinforcements, and I picked your regiment to be the one to do it. But that's not what happened at Gettysburg. I mean, what happened at Gettysburg is Chamberlain's brigade was recollected on the 3rd, and then they were moved to the left center of the line, about where the New Jersey Brigade Monument is located.
So in the woods.
Today. In the woods.
Yeah.
And that's
New Jersey shoved in the woods. You hear that, Pete?
Yeah, we've actually walked to it, right?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Once we finally found it, nobody would tell us where it was. Oh, New Jersey? I don't know.
That was a very good unit, the New Jersey Brigade.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, that's why Chamberlain writes they were under fire, because during the heavy bombardment before Pickett's charge, everybody along there was shelled.
Okay, so they weren't taken way back for rest or anything. They were just moved to another part, but in a support position, I guess, or why would, so I mean, they kind of were.
They were kind of
on the line.
On the line, yes. If an attack had occurred in that area, they would have been in the fighting again.
Okay, but his unit was replaced then by Fisher's brigade?
Yeah, they weren't on the front line. They were, because there was McCandless's brigade and there was a 6th Corps brigade that was actually in front of them, I believe. So they were in a supporting line, but they would have been involved in any fighting if the attack had come into that area. Yeah, Fisher's brigade of Pennsylvania Reserves had relieved them, but not before Chamberlain had to take his regiment up to Big Round Top in the night, and he got a couple of men killed. Because they ran into Confederates up there, and the Confederates fired into them. He had a couple men killed, and I think 3 men wounded. So, to Chamberlain, that was a really big deal. I mean, anytime a man is killed in your unit, that's a really big deal. We tend to think, one guy got killed, not a big deal. Well, he knew all of these guys.
Yeah, right.
I mean, so one guy getting killed was a big deal, particularly when you just had this big fight. And this other unit doesn't want to go up there because it's dark and they don't know the terrain and they just don't want to go. And
who was that other unit?
That was the Fisher's brigade.
So
Fisher didn't want to take his brigade up there. He was supposed to take his brigade up and occupy Big Round Top. And he was like, I'm not taking my men up there in the dark. We don't know the ground. We're not going up there. And then the order came down, Chamberlain, you take your regiment up there.
So, oh wow. See, I like this guy even more now that I hear that. So this guy, Fisher, with a whole brigade, is afraid to go up there in the dark, and Chamberlain, after just getting his nose bloodied, he and his, how many men does he have left?
Probably 200 some.
200? And now he's going to go up there in the dark. He's like, fine. Yeah, wow.
He doesn't. Yeah.
Wow, what a set. What a set on that guy. All right, so now Pickett's Charge happens in the book and in the movie. Okay, there's Tom. Now, okay, so Tom and Lawrence are sitting there by the little hay cart.
Right.
And they're having a little talk, a little cry over Buster, who's dead. And then all of a sudden, some shells come whizzing in. And now, so Chamberlain was close enough, though. But I mean, I know it wasn't the focal point of the bombardment where he was, but I'm sure some stray shots.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. Why does Shower have to put? I guess because it's just in the thick of it.
Sure, you want to put him right in the middle of it. You got to put him right in the middle of
it's more dramatic. What with the Pickett's Charge part of the book and the movie did you get much wrong with that? I mean, that seems like a pretty straightforward story.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. There's a big part of that story that is left out of the book completely because it doesn't reflect well on Longstreet. Is that, Lee didn't sit down and pray the night before and come up with Pickett's Charge. In fact, Pickett's Charge wasn't even his original plan.
Right.
His original plan was to renew the attack by Longstreet's corps on the Union left. And where that was supposed to be, we'll never know because Lee left it up to Longstreet to pick the place. Just as he did with Ewell, he wanted Ewell to apply simultaneous pressure on the other flank. Now, Ewell could have meant Cemetery Hill, but he decided Culp's Hill because that was where he had gained a lodgment. So Ewell is very clear in his report. My orders were to attack at sunup or at sunrise, right? That was the plan. We're going to attack at sunrise. And he does exactly what he's ordered to do. The battle is on. The Yankees start shelling him, and he starts attacking, and the fight is on. Longstreet isn't ready to go. And when Lee waits a little while and realizes nothing's going on, that's when he rides down to find out what's happening. That's when he finds out that Longstreet, who's very disingenuous in his accounts of the battle, he claims that he got no orders from Lee. I simply don't accept that. I don't believe that can be possibly true.
Right. What did he claim?
Well, he claimed that I didn't receive any orders from Lee on the night of the 2nd. So I didn't know what the plan was.
Okay.
And I had come up with a plan. He'd sent out his scouts, he said, and I'd come up with a plan where we could get around the Round Tops. That was a preposterous proposal at this point in the battle. I mean, you can't.
He's still trying for that.
He's still trying, but I think what he's really trying to do, he's grasping at straws to do anything not to make another attack against this position the Union Army occupies. Okay. Because he sees Lee in a way as, how can you expend this many men? I mean, we're not going to gain anything out of this. I don't see the victory that we need using these tactics. And in that respect, I would probably agree with Longstreet.
Yeah, I do too.
I don't agree with Longstreet in the way Longstreet carried himself. So if Longstreet had ridden over to Lee on the night of the 2nd and said, hey, boss, here's what happened, I do not recommend another attack tomorrow. My men are beat up, even with Pickett's division. We got to do something different.
Right.
And Lee had said, no, you will do thus and such. Then Longstreet, you can be like, okay, I mean, I can kind of sympathize with him. But instead, he doesn't say anything to Lee. And we know he got orders because Ewell got orders. Ewell's clear that he got orders.
Right.
Then the other thing Ewell's clear about is Ewell says, I received word from General Lee that Longstreet's attack would be delayed until 10 a.m. Now, at 10 a.m., what happened on Culp's Hill?
They're still fighting.
An order came down for Junius Daniels' brigade and Edward O'Neill's brigade to make an assault against Stewart's brigade, Bradley Stewart's brigade, and Daniels' brigade to make an assault against the Union earthworks on Culp's Hill.
Okay.
Both of those officers, this is unprecedented for the Army in Northern Virginia, protested the order. They're like, this attack is suicide. They were ordered to make it. So people were like, I just can't imagine. This is crazy. Why were they doing this? Longstreet was supposed to attack at 10 o'clock. It's 10 o'clock. You need simultaneous pressure.
Okay.
So Ewell is saying, you will attack because this attack is going to occur. We have to support this attack.
Okay, all right.
So now you can imagine if you're Ewell, you're not too happy that attack is not ready till 1 o'clock. Your attack's over.
Yeah.
So,
because you're on Culp's Hill, you're fighting, but when that ends, it's what, 8 hours, 7-8 hours that they've been
7 hours
fighting?
of fighting, right? And then the other thing about Pickett's charge, that there's no satisfactory explanation for it, and the Confederate accounts are completely silent about it, which is always suspicious when nobody writes about something.
Yeah.
So Lee and Longstreet have this discussion in which Lee kind of comes down on, okay, you say they're strong on the left. You don't want to attack over there. They can't be strong everywhere. We're going to attack their center, and you're going to command the attack. And then Longstreet's like, no 15,000 men ever arrayed for battle can carry that position, blah, blah, blah. I'm opposed to this attack, all these sorts of things. Okay, we resolve it. You're going to make the attack. It's going to be on the center, and this is what's supposed to happen. It takes them almost 7 hours to organize that attack. Now, Pickett's division isn't in position yet. You do have to communicate to all your artillery batteries. You have to
There's a lot that needs to be done.
I don't think there's 7 hours worth of work to be done. That part of it, I've never fully understood on the Confederate side, why it took them so long to prepare that attack. So it was the other part about it when people say, well, it was doomed to defeat. I'm like, that attack was incredibly carefully planned.
Yeah.
But even as carefully planned as it was, there are some glaring things at it, like Brockenbrau's brigade, the weakest brigade in the entire attack, is the left flank. Not a great idea. There's no troops to protect the left flank. So there's no covering force on the left flank. The troops on the left, Rhodes' division, they have no orders. There's no orders what to do if the attack succeeds or doesn't succeed. McLaws doesn't even know the attack's taking place. He's not even, they don't even communicate to McLaws.
Where's he?
He's holding his position.
Oh, you mean he doesn't know ahead of time?
He doesn't know ahead of time. He doesn't.
Really?
He doesn't. Neither does Law. They don't know what's going on. So there's no. Longstreet isn't making a big operational plan and communicating to everybody. He's carefully planning this one attack, and he spends a lot of time on his corps. So there's a lot of planning that goes into his corps, Pickett's division and his artillery. Okay. I don't see the same level of detail with the troops from the 3rd Corps. And what that may have something to do with is Longstreet's like, hey, A.P. Hill, I mean, he can deal with the details. I'll tell him what needs to be done. But I'm not going to micromanage A.P. Hill. That could be. I mean, that might be what happened.
Is it true that he suggested because 2 of the 3 divisions are Hill's that Hill should lead the attack?
He did. I'm sure he did that. Yeah. He did not want to make the attack at all. I'm sure.
But is Hill up now, or is he still in Cashtown nursing his VD?
He's here. He's here. Okay. But I think Lee knows that Hill is new to command. He's a very aggressive officer. He's not feeling well. And he didn't perform all that well on July the 1st.
Yeah, well, he was hardly there, right? I mean, he was
not much. And Longstreet's your best tactician. I mean, he's the guy. Even though he doesn't want to make the attack, he's a professional. You know he's going to look to the details, and if this attack's going to succeed, he's your best bet that he's going to do it. So I think Lee has a lot of confidence in him, and he shows that confidence in saying, no, I'm not going to relieve you from this attack. I'm going to make it, and you're going to command it.
But what is your opinion, like your feeling, going back, human experience and emotions and all that stuff? What is your feeling that explains what seems to have gone wrong? I mean, because you mentioned, nobody's covering the left. Rhodes has no orders. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking you got Pickett. He's fresh, right? You use him as like the point, and you think of it as like a sword. He's the tip of the sword, right. And then you continue that an echelon attack that Lee tried to do on the second. But now you do it. You include Rhodes, and you surround them, and you gulp them up. At least try. I mean, like you're saying, like Brockenbrough is weak, and those guys, they've all, they had a tough time the first day, and they've taken a lot of casualties. There's a lot of walking wounded, I read. There's a lot of guys that are not in 100% shape.
Right, yes.
So, but yeah, it just seems to me like, I don't want to say careless, but it seems careless to me. It seems that you planned the Pickett part of the assault, but did nothing else. It was just like, let's see if this works. And
well, there is planning that goes into it. I mean, there had to be a fair amount to notify all the battery commanders and APL's corps, and to notify the brigade commanders, the infantry brigade, and the division commanders. I mean, but it's. I don't see that Longstreet pays the same attention to detail on Hill's front that he does on his front. But even on his front, I don't think he pays the attention to detail that Lee was perhaps hoping for. So
now, let me pause you right there. I want to ask you this. Now, you say that Longstreet wasn't paying as much attention to the detail on Hill's front.
Right.
Now, I know one of the other names for this is Longstreet's assault, right? Was Hill supposed to be subordinate to Longstreet in this, even though they're both corps commanders?
No. What you're really doing.
So why would Longstreet be paying attention to Hill's front? Shouldn't Hill be paying attention to Hill's front?
This is one of the problems with the Confederate Army. Is the Confederate Army does not do staff work very well.
Okay.
And anytime you're having inter-corps cooperation, it requires a certain level of oversight from Army headquarters staff. That is something sorely lacking in the Army of Northern Virginia.
How big is Lee's staff?
Lee's staff is very small. I would say he doesn't have a staff like Meade has. Meade has a really true professional staff. So you look at Wise Warren on Little Round Top on July the 2nd. He may dislike Dan Butterfield, but what's Dan Butterfield doing? He's drafting all these orders. He is a chief of staff, a true chief of staff. So, Meade, I think, uses his command, his staff very effectively.
So we're talking Lee, maybe half a dozen men on his staff?
He probably has more than that. He doesn't have a type of working staff that is going to be able to ride up to Longstreet and to A.P. Hill and say, okay, are you executing the will of General Lee and doing it well on time? They don't have that type of authority. So you ride up to Longstreet and you're kind of deferential to Longstreet and Lee is trying to be his own chief of staff, really, in a way, and the Army commander. He's trying to do all these different things. And I think maybe one of the things that Lee was hoping for from Longstreet is that Longstreet was going to make an attack like he had at Second Manassas,
right,
which was a devastating assault, where it was almost 30,000 men that he put together in that assault. And I think Lee may have been hoping that is what Longstreet was going to do. But here's what I think Longstreet's thinking was, and I don't. You can criticize him, but at the same time you can defend him. I think his thinking was, look, I'm going to use the troops that Lee has earmarked to make this attack, and no one else, unless by some miracle it seizes that ridge. Then I'll issue the orders to everyone else to go in, because what he doesn't want to do is he feels that this is a reckless decision by Lee. So if we go all in with everything we got and it fails, we're done for. We're done for. So we got to have something for the broken part of this attack to fall back and rally on and be able to hold our position the next day if the battle continues.
Right.
Because the thing is, the mistake that sometimes we often make is that, well, the battle's going to be 3 days long.
Right. They don't know that at that time.
Right. If you're Longstreet, it might be 4 or 5 days.
Right,
You don't
right.
know. So
Yeah.
let's keep some gas in the tank here. So I think that's probably why McLaws doesn't get any orders. Law doesn't get any orders. There's no orders to Rhodes. I don't want them to participate in the attack.
But not even orders to, like you say, like in case it fails and they counterattack, not even orders to fill that gap, at least from where Pickett's leaving,
Right.
or something. Fortify, like just put some kind of defense up.
Well, he does have 3 brigades of Richard Anderson's division, one of whom hasn't even really been in the battle yet, Mahone's brigade.
Mahone.
He does have some support line there.
Okay.
And there's all these articles that people wrote later on about the second wave of Pickett's charge, and there was no second wave in Pickett's charge.
Well, with who?
I mean,
Mahone, just one brigade?
Well, there were 3 brigades, and
Okay.
they were actually, what their role was, is along with some of the artillery, they would move up and help solidify your hold. And Longstreet's going to halt them. He doesn't let them go in because he doesn't want them to get mauled. There's no reason to get them mauled. We've already had enough troops get mauled. 2 brigades of Anderson's division go in to support Pickett's flank, and they get shredded. But there are...
Who is that?
That's
Sims?
Wilcox and Lang's brigades.
Oh, Lang, okay.
But again, there's another example where there's some breakdown in communications because Wilcox, who has kind of tactical control of both brigades, he is on the reverse slope. He sees Pickett's division go over the slope, and he doesn't realize that division, once they get over the slope, kind of wheels to the left to attack up towards the angle and come up the trees.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks they went straight. So when Wilcox advances, he goes straight over the ground in front of him. So there's a big gap between Pickett's right and Wilcox's left that Stannard's brigade is right in between.
Oh, okay.
They turn around and they shred Wilcox and Lang's men. He takes all sorts of casualties, which he was really bitter about afterwards. But that was, again, a case of poor communications and coordination.
Okay, well, I could talk about this for years. I could keep going forever, but I think we pretty much. Well, now you know what? Real quick though, I just brought up the 2nd Maine. Mm-hmm. That's true, but
Yes.
but it wasn't so close to the battle, correct? They've been with them. They were already with them for a while.
Yeah, it was during the campaign, but it wasn't like right before the battle.
Okay.
It was during the campaign, and they didn't all come in one group.
Oh.
They came in bits and spurts of men.
And did all but 6 of them choose to pick up the musket?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's true too.
Yeah.
And Dan Butterfield and his bugle calls. Ta 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 ta.
I haven't studied the whole.
He did write taps.
Well, he did.
Or he
did, but there's a possibility
modified
that maybe somebody else actually wrote taps and he liked it and he used it. He got the credit for it. I don't know, because I read something recently about another unit that mentioned that they had come up with this bugle call.
And he just stole it.
Well,
he's one of Hooker's guys.
who knows? I mean, who knows? Yeah.
Well, no, because he
did.
a friend of mine and I were talking. I can't remember who it was and what exactly we were talking about, but the word tattoo. In the cemetery, there's all those plaques with that poem,
right?
And there's a line about the soldier's last tattoo,
right? Kind of the last song.
Yeah. So we were talking about how we're like, how many tattoos did these guys get? That is, his last one is like this. And then in some other context it was used, and I was like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
It was regarding taps.
Right.
I think they said taps replaced something tattoo, and I go, oh, wait.
It's like in Scotland, one of their most famous events is the military tattoo in Edinburgh, but they also do one in Inverness. And that is a musical program.
Right.
It's kind of like the end of the day. It's the tattoo. It's closing the day.
So do you know what the origin of the word tattoo is?
No,
and
I don't.
why does it have a musical meaning and a ink on the body meaning?
Yeah.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah.
I'll cut it out that you don't know that. All right. So so your website is D. Scott Hartwig, Hartwig. And I'm not saying D like the. It's D, as in what, David?
David, yep.
Okay. So that's really, your first name is David?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
But you go by the middle name like they did in the 19th century.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. And let's just, some of your books here, you can go to his website, you can see some of his books, To Antietam Creek, the Maryland Campaign of September 1862, Battle, The Nature and Consequence of Civil War Combat, Gettysburg, the complete pictorial of battlefield monuments, the Antietam Campaign, Giants in Their Tall Black Hats, the essays on the Iron Brigade, and A Killer Angel's Companion. You've written a lot of books, and all of those, by the time this comes out, will be on our recommended reading list, and there will be links to them on Amazon. And of course, when you do that, it supports these authors, but it also helps support the show and buys them dinner. So there's a section on your website for speaking and tours. You do speaking engagements and tours people can hire you for, or how does that work?
I don't do many tours. I do like some, like the Civil War Institute. I've sometimes done a tour for them.
So like for a charity event.
Or some event like that I do. I do some speaking engagements. I do a few a year. I'm not interested in going around every weekend and speaking to different groups everywhere. I don't really have an interest in doing that, because you can't write books if you're doing that all the time.
And that's what you're in the middle of doing now, is you're writing your book.
Right,
and your book is a sequel to your Antietam, to your Maryland campaign, To Antietam Creek.
Right.
So that book is 800 pages long.
Right.
And it ends the night before the Battle of Antietam begins.
Well, in some ways, the battle's already started. September 16th, the Union Army made a reconnaissance across Antietam Creek, and that was the first fighting.
Okay.
But I ended there because one, the book was long enough as it is at that point. I mean, the thing is, the book tells the story of the Battle of South Mountain, or the battles of South Mountain, and the siege and capture of Harper's Ferry, which is a really big story.
Yeah.
And generally what happens when people write about the Antietam campaign is those get short shrift, and everybody writes about Antietam. So I felt I wanted to give them full attention. And I ended it there because, in a way, the Battle of Antietam, this incredible act of violence, is going to change the nation in a way none of these men really can foresee, because it's going to lead to Lincoln issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. And that is going to bring about a massive social change in America, because it's going to start the ball rolling towards the abolition of slavery in the United States. So none of these guys really have any idea that that is what is going to start to happen. I mean, they may see the wars going in that direction, and they may be fighting to preserve slavery if you're a Confederate soldier, but they don't see this battle is going to bring that event on. So to me, in a way, it's the end of this country that was, and it's going to be the beginning of a different sort of country after this big battle of Antietam.
I mean, really, that's the whole, on many levels, that's what this war does.
Yeah.
Is it changes. Like, I always loved the picture of Lee and Grant at Appomattox, and Lee's all in this resplendent uniform. He's on time, and he's sitting there waiting, and Grant shows up all dusty and muddy, and he's wearing, from what I read, a private's blouse, not even a general's uniform, because he was out there in the shit. Yeah,
it's kind of, Grant is kind of the elevation of the common man.
Yeah.
And Lee, in a way, kind of represents
the death of chivalry.
The elite.
Yeah.
The elite of the Confederacy. Yeah.
We were talking, I'm going to let you go. We were talking before about, having a passion for all this stuff and everything. I'm listening to you talk about Antietam. I was recently down there. My girlfriend's ancestor, another ancestor of hers, died there. They were mustered in August, and within 20 minutes, he was one of the dead.
Yeah.
The 123rd Pennsylvania, I think?
Probably the 124th or 25th.
Or maybe it was 25th.
Yeah.
Over on the right there.
Yep.
So we went down there, and we were at the monument there, and it's all, now it's exciting for me because I have a connection to it and everything like that. And I'm listening to you talk about it, and I want to read this book because you're right. When you read books about battles, the campaign leading up to the battle everything is brushed over because they want to get you to the battle.
Right.
But there's battles that occur on the way to the big battle.
Right.
So, and they don't really, but Harper's Ferry falling, that's a big deal.
It was a huge deal.
Yeah. So to do it this way, I think is really cool, and I'm interested in it because I want to take like that really kind of deep dive into parts of these battles that we don't really know a lot about or hear. Well, we know, but aren't really told a lot about.
Yeah.
But so my question is, you get the passion for all this stuff, and I'm getting all excited listening to this, and I'm like, I just want to consume. I want to consume.
Yeah.
Where do you find the time? I mean,
you just chip away at it. You have to chip away. I mean, it took
where do you find the patience then?
It took me about 20 years to write that first book.
And are you writing books, other books while you're writing?
Sometimes you're writing essays and other things like that. Sometimes you just make time for it. But typically, I'm interested in it, and I like to write because it's a creative process. So I like that whole process in it. But that's part of the reason I retired, is so I could write more.
Yeah.
You can't do much writing when you're raising kids and you're working full time, and you can't.
No, it's hard.
Unless you're a person who only needs 4 hours of sleep a night.
Right. Right, which I am not.
Right.
Yeah, no, it sounds to me like what you're saying is if you really want to get immersed in this stuff, is work for the Park Service for 30-something years.
Well, it's your
then
job.
Retire.
Yeah. It's your job.
Yeah.
You have to learn this stuff as part of your job, and then you're around the history all the time, and you're around people who are reading and researching it all the time. So you're always talking to people about it, and that's how you're learning a lot of things. Mm-hmm. You're learning about sources and stories and so on, that if you're just sitting in your house, you're only going to learn what you can read in books or watch on YouTube or something like that. Yeah, it's not as exciting.
I just think it's so cool that I could sit out here in the visitor center a lot and do this and talk to you and all these other guests that we've had on and will have on, and people love talking about this stuff.
Sure, it's because it's interesting. It's really compelling.
But yeah. Now, here's a question that we ask all of our guests in the beginning, and I totally forgot to ask you this, and then I'm really going to let you go.
Okay.
Why Gettysburg?
Why Gettysburg? Well, it is, when people think of the Civil War, the average person out there who normally doesn't think anything about the Civil War ever, except for maybe a couple days in the year when they come to Gettysburg, it's the place they think about. So Gettysburg is a place in which you can introduce people to the whole Civil War.
Oh, I like that. It's a doorway, a gateway to the rest of the Civil War.
It's a gateway, yes.
That's a pretty good one, Pete, right?
That's one of the better answers that I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah. The last one we got was Just Cuz. So, okay. DScottHartwig.com is the website. Thanks for coming on, Scott. And come and do this again. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me.
All right, sure.
Yep.
See you, Pete.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Okay, man.
That was great.